Good morning, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone.
And I was just waiting for a moment for my microphone to unmute because I decided that I would trust what the screen said and assume that if it said I'm muted and I started talking, it would appear rather silent. That's Steve Mason kind of singing us into our June Spiritual Saturday, kind of focusing on what do we do now, dealing with an uncertain future. And I think the first thing we do now is called opening to Shabbat, opening to the energy of Shabbat, the energy of Sabbath. It's not an energy that only happens on Friday night and Saturday. It's not an energy that only exists on the seventh day. But we celebrate it on the seventh day to remind us of that which is always available. It's a celebration of creation. It's a celebration of creation. You know, traditional observance prohibits or inhibits any work. But the focus really is not about work or non-work. The focus is really on letting go of the need for anything to be different in this moment. Because that's a kind of rest that transcends simply physical non-doing. It's different than taking a nap or having a day without appointments, or it's something far deeper, far more important. And I'm not sure that there was ever a time, at least in my life, when I've been more in need of remembering the energy of Shabbat, the energy of letting be, the energy of letting go. So it's a place of invitation. It's a place of possibility. Everything is as it is, whether we want it to be or not. Within our bodies, within our minds, within our hearts, within our families, within our friends, within our communities, within our country, within our world. And allowing ourselves to open simply to appreciate creation doesn't mean we are condemned to it exactly as it is. Quite the opposite. To allow ourselves to release the need for things to be different supports the radical possibility of shift, of movement, because it is so often that we discover that our resistance, in fact, inhibits the continual flow, the ongoing evolution that is called creation. Creation is not something that occurred over a 7-day period or a millennia period. Creation is something that's happening in each and every moment. We are part of an evolving reality that itself is called creation. And it's only a trick of the mind, a trick of our focus, a trick of our resistance that allows us to pretend that things are not moving all the time. So just for a moment, to allow ourselves to move into a space of allowing, a space of simply being, a space of allowing things to be exactly as they are, even to allow those feelings within us which insist we don't want things to be this way. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to think this way. And allow that as well. Whatever occurs, whatever is. Shabbat is a time of saying yes. Shabbat is a time of opening so that the flow of evolution, the flow of creation can continue to unfold in us, through us, as us, right now and right here. So please join us, even though on the computer you'll just hear Steve singing Ma Yafeh Hayom, how beautiful the day. We invite you to sing along, to fill whatever space you are viewing from, and to allow yourself to know that the energies flowing through you at this moment join with each and every one of us. In fact, join with all of us as we allow ourselves to open to the absolute beauty, the absolute blessing of this moment of creation and this moment of creation and this moment of creation. Ma Yafeh Hayom, how beautiful the day.
Ma Yafeh Hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma Yafeh Hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. How beautiful the day. Shabbat Shalom. How beautiful the day. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Maya V'Hayom, Shabbat Shalom, Maya V'Hayom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. How beautiful the day, Shabbat Shalom. How beautiful the day, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
You know, I'm reminded as I hear the song, Steve, that, you know, Shabbat, although it's usually just translated Sabbath and signifies rest, the root also means to dwell, you know, to fully dwell in the moment. Like the Psalm verse that says, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, you know, how beautiful it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together, to dwell truly together. Shevet, it's the same letters as Shabbat. It's the same energy. Shabbat is an indwelling in creation without resistance. And shalom, you know, which is translated peace, is from a root that means to make complete, to make whole. Shalom is the kind of peace that flows naturally when we awaken to the essential wholeness of our being. Shabbat Shalom, which is the greeting on Shabbat, the greeting on Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom. Sabbath wholeness, Sabbath peace, Sabbath completeness. Well, it's really a teaching in itself. And sometimes it's really challenging. Sometimes it's really challenging to clear the fog, to get out from under the weight, and to allow ourselves to step out of resistance, to step out of upset, to step out of fear, particularly in this incredible time of uncertainty, in this incredible time of confusion. I had a adventure this week. My little toaster oven had stopped working, and after lengthy considering options, I decided finally to replace it. And I really am enjoying my new toaster oven. But this week I was heating a kind of tortilla, and I was eating while I was heating it, and I forgot that it was in, and I had it on a toast setting, and all of a sudden I started smelling smoke, and I looked up on the counter, and there was smoke pouring out of the toaster oven unit. The tortilla was like a cinder. It was inappropriate to set it on a toast setting, and I had just forgotten about it. Well, you might guess what happened. The fire alarm went off, and I did my best to try to open all the windows and try to wave air toward the fire alarm, which was remarkably loud. In my apartment, there was also a voice from the other end of the living room screaming, "Fire, fire, there's a fire." And finally, I found a fan and plugged in the fan and pointed the fan at the fire alarm. And after a while, it started going from the red light to the green light and back and forth. And then finally, the noise stopped. And although the noise stopped, the odor, the smell of the smoke, it smelled like there was a fire. And although I set up some fans to try to clear the air, the smell of the fire just lasted. And in fact, now, almost a week later, I still am aware of that odor. It's like sometimes there was so much smoke that it just doesn't clear right away. And I was just thinking about how that is in consciousness, how that is in my mind, with significant disturbances that kind of get handled in the moment when they are experienced as emergent, as urgent. But so often they don't really go fully away. There's a residue. So that even though we might be out from under the intensity, their odor has just so permeated, maybe the cells of our bodies, of our minds, of our hearts, that we might think we've avoided them, we've escaped them, but we're still carrying them around, like almost ready to be ignited, ready to be fanned into renewed smoke, maybe into renewed flame. And I just was feeling what an interesting metaphor and what an interesting thing to remember. We are dealing with overlays of so many challenges. We're dealing with fires of environmental degradation that we've been watching happen, watching mammoth icebergs collapsing, watching predictions that this is to be the warmest year on record. And we've been watching economic disparities growing more and more severe. And we've been watching the ravages of racism erupting now in expressions of violence, which are calling so many of us to seek some kind of response, some kind of healing, some kind of possibility, rather than just contributing to some kind of mass destruction. And the virus, where it's unclear even how it operates, what it does to us, with uncertainty. It's incredible. It appears as though there are more scientific minds worldwide working on COVID-19, and yet the full nature of it shifts. And so news reports go one way, then another way, masks, no masks, droplets, no droplets. uncertainties and the news, to try to watch the news cycles, and all of a sudden the violence, the racial Black Lives Matter protests eclipse COVID news eclipses that. One hardly hears about the focus on economic disparity. One hardly hears about environmental degradation. And the weight of fear and uncertainty grows. And sometimes we think we get out of it. We open to calmness, possibility, but it exists like the odor of smoke after a fire, not totally cleared, almost waiting for the next event to re-stimulate the eruption of that. And I think it's important to honor what's happening and to honor the impact that it has on us. For those of us who have been sheltering in place, staying home, avoiding crowds, learning a totally different way of living. For those of us who are growing more accustomed by the week to engaging with each other in the way we are now engaging in this moment, where I find myself more and more comfortable talking to a little dot at the top of my laptop screen, and allowing myself to know that actually in some reality that is now happening now, I am fully connecting with those of you who are joining me here. We're in this together. We're in this together. And together, we want to try another day. It's a song by Steve Mason. Try another day.
Thanks, Rabbi Ted. I was telling Rabbi Ted that I attended a parenting workshop a number of years ago, many years ago, and one of the takeaways from that workshop was always reminding your kids, and really it turns into reminding ourselves that, you know, hey, you can try again tomorrow, or you can try again later today, or something like that. And I looked at my kids, and then I looked at my relationship, and then my kids and their relationships with their loved ones, and then started to look at, so try another day. How about try another, you know, an hour from now, or 5 minutes from now, or the next moment. And I think there's certainly opportunity to do that in this time. So this is called Try Another Day. We battled way too long, struggled through some nights, worrying about who's wrong, possessed with being right, dreaming we'd hang on to memories fading fast, gravity so strong keeps us in the past. Let's try another day. Perhaps tomorrow's light will wash this fear away and bring love back inside. Let's dig out from this hole before they ever list our names amid the tragedy told. Let's try another day. Though I know there's fear, I pray with heart in hand. The only thing that's clear, it's time we make this stand. Let's try another day with perhaps a little space where love can find its way. Fill our hearts with grace, respecting each one's soul. We just might find a way before another hurt unfolds. Let's try another day. Let's try another day.
Thank you, Steve. Let's try another day. Let's try another hour. Let's try another minute. Let's try another second. It's so challenging, when we feel ourselves so caught up that it's almost as though there's not another minute and there's not another hour and there's not another day. We just get stuck. And we become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. What do we do now? What do we do now when we are dealing with an uncertain future? Certainly there are needs for changes in the outer world. We need significant changes in the way police operate, the militarization of police forces, the confusion of the myriad responsibilities that have been foisted off onto police officers rather than onto more appropriate social service agencies. The challenges of getting those agencies properly funded, the challenges of providing a safety net in this country that is reasonable and effective, instead of focusing so much of the governmental energy on ensuring the wealth of the smallest percentage of our population, and ignoring the needs of the many. Certainly there are changes that have to be made in our treatment of the environment. Noticing in some ways that our sheltering in place has actually benefited our planet. And yet the calls, the insistence on returning to life as normal inhibits the possibility of that transition into a healthier way of being. There's so much fear and so much anger, so many ideas about what needs to change, what needs to not change. And of course, the real challenge is for us to recognize that, yes, it's true that concrete changes have to be made in the way we treat each other, the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat our planet. Yes, significant and meaningful changes have to be made to bridge racial divides, to create an equity among all races, among men and women, among all those of all religions, among all those of all genders, to create equity and to appreciate that racism is even not limited to just race. It's limited to any experience, any thinking, any belief that any group is better than any other group. Whether it's a matter of race, whether it's a matter of belief, whether it's a matter of culture, whether it's a matter of country. There's a deep racism that is inbuilt in our separateness, our belief that we are separate. The radical teaching of my tradition is the same as the radical spiritual teaching of all traditions, and that is that one life, one presence, one being expresses as the many. One being expresses as the many. But when the many forget that we are one, we wind up stuck in our apparent separateness, competing, contrasting, ultimately fighting with each other and fearing the other. And in that fear, accenting the terrible smoke, the terrible flames that cause us to be unkind, to be hurtful, to be violent toward each other, toward our planet, and even toward ourselves. There are significant changes that need to be made in the outer world, but many of us have lived long enough to truly appreciate that if all we do is make changes in the outer world, no matter how effective they may appear at the moment, they will not endure. Many of us can look back at the civil rights movement of the 60s, at the changes that were made in desegregation, and we thought that truly significant healing had taken place. And because it was change only in the outer world, it could not endure. And it's the same with every movement, the anti-war protests, protesting Vietnam. And many of us thought this was really an anti-war movement that would extend and expand. We have to learn that war actually does not solve problems. Every war simply perpetuates the next one, the possibilities, the ground for the next one. It's the same with rebellion. Time and time again, we discover that the rebels fighting authoritarianism, fighting control by a government, wind up themselves, when in power, exceeding even the authoritarianism that they fought. And surely that's the danger now with some of the Black Lives Matter protests. Like if we perpetuate the us versus them, and we want to win, and in order for us to win, you have to lose. Well, in whatever guise, that's called war. And every war simply sets up the environment for the next one. No, it is true that we need significant changes in the way we live on our planet, the way we live with each other, the way we live with ourselves. But no changes we make in the outer world can endure without significant changes in our inner world. And this is really the most challenging work. It's one thing to try to manipulate things on the outside. It's one thing to try to fix things out there. It's a whole other thing. It's a whole other process to look into the inner spaces and to detach the nature of our inner space from the conditions in our world. Because when our inner space is controlled by the conditions in our world, we are essentially victims. We're victims of whatever those conditions may happen to be. We lack the essential freedom that is essential to the recognition, the realization, and the expression, and ultimately the celebration of who we are, of the being we are. The challenge is for the many to remember we're one. For each and every one of us to do the work that allows us to open again to that which we carry within ourselves. And nobody has it but us. We've already got it. I used to think that altered states of consciousness referred to the inclusivity that occurs in meditation or in experiences of transcendence. And some time ago, it became clear to me that altered states of reality actually refer to the state in which we live most of the time. The belief in our separateness, the acceptance of our identity simply as this particular expression of individuality, our attachment to ego, that the whole of me is the Ted of me. That condemns me. It condemns me to a kind of forgetting that inhibits my own possibility of actually being part of the solution and not simply contributing to the problem, even when I'm doing everything I think necessary to change the conditions in the outer world to support greater freedom, greater equity, greater equality, greater care, greater consciousness, greater awareness. So we're challenged, particularly at times like this with so many fires and so much smoke. We're challenged to move from a conditional, well, ultimately to an unconditional awakening of the truth of our being, the truth of the presence that each and every one of us, that all life carries, the truth of the one consciousness, the one presence, the one being, the one life, the wonder of witnessing that life, of witnessing that consciousness, of witnessing that presence, awakening through each other, awakening around us, transcending the separative influences of our senses which allow us to appreciate and allow us to maneuver in the material world, but hide from us how absolutely interconnected we are with all of being, with all of life. to utilize our senses to transcend our senses, to utilize moments of spiritual practice, to utilize moments of remembering, of honoring, to move from being owned by conditions, being determined by conditions, to remembering the who we are. And remembering on that level that there is no other. There is no other. We operate in a world of otherness. Well, that's really a gift, because ultimately it gives us the opportunity to support each other and care for each other. But when we buy into otherness as the true nature of our reality, we are stuck. And no matter what changes we make in that outer world, they will never endure until we remember there is no other. I'm really delighted that each of the spiritual Saturdays that I've been working with Steve Mason, he has songs that always appear to me to be written expressly for the focus of the particular spiritual Saturday that we're enjoying together. So he brought this song for this Shabbat, and it's called There Is No Other.
Thank you, Rabbi Ted. Too often I get blinded in the darkness before the dawn. Thank God my soul reminds me we're all expressions of the loving one, and that there is no other, just the one. There is no other, only the one. So I'm digging down through layers. We've all got that spark inside, and when my candle's just a flicker, let my oneness find me where love resides, where there is no other. Though we are sisters and brothers, there is no other, just the one. Oh, there is no other, only the one. Only the one. Only the one. When my fear fogs my eyesight, and my tears, they only burn, and I pray for memory from the other side, where the brilliant light of love returns, where there is no other. Though we are sisters and brothers, there is no other, just the one. There is no other. We could be fighters or lovers. There is no other, only the one. Because I am, oh I am, let me remember that I am. Because I am, oh, I am, let me remember that I am, that I am, that I am. There is no other. Oh, there is no other. There is no other. Only the one. Only the one. There is no other. We are the one.
Awesome. There is no other.
Thanks.
We are the one. There is no other. We are the one. You know, so much of the time on Spiritual Saturday, there's a line that's been on the screen, on the slide, from the book of Deuteronomy. And the line is called the Shema. And I want to talk about it for a moment, and I'd like to ask, yeah, there it is. I like this. I'm assuming that you see the same thing I'm seeing, where the words are bigger than I am. And I think that's really important, because the words are bigger than every individual being. It's like, yes, each and every one of us contains within ourselves the whole, but we are individualized expressions of that, and just so often get lost in our individuality rather than utilizing it in the service of the deeper oneness, the deeper love, the deeper compassion that allows us to flow blessings into our own vehicle, into each other, into our planet, into our world. The words of the 4th verse of the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the 5th of the 5 books called the 5 books of Moses, the first books that are included in the Hebrew Bible, as well as the first books that are included in what in the Christian world gets called the Old Testament. And the book of Deuteronomy is mostly a repetition and a deeper spiritual awareness of a path of oneness, because oneness is the essential path of Judaism, and I suspect of every authentic spiritual tradition. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. In the earliest days, when prayer was replacing the activities of the ancient temple, so we're talking 2nd, 1st century before the Common Era, the temple is losing its authority because human consciousness has changed, and we are awakening to deeper levels of the significance of individual consciousness, that the way is opening within ourselves. And that winds up being a teaching from the great early rabbis. It winds up being a central teaching of the Jewish teacher called Jesus. It winds up being supported as we notice an evolution of human consciousness. So Shema Yisrael, Shema, sometimes I think that's all we need is the word Shema. I don't know where the words just went, but if they come back on, you'll see them. Thank you. Shema, listen. Sometimes I think that's enough. Sometimes I think that's a mantra in itself. In the earliest days of focusing on prayer, focusing on internal operation on consciousness during the latter half of the BCE, before the Common Era, there were two main focuses for prayer, and one was what we call the Ten Commandments, and the other was this line, the Shema. For many of us, it became a central focus of our meditation. Shema, listen. Yisrael. Yisrael is often translated just Israel, but the line occurs before Israel was a country. Israel was a people, but Israel, Yisrael, is a word that actually, El is one of the general names of God, the eternal, and Yisrael means enduring, persisting. Listen, there's something that endures. Behind all the shifting, all the changes, all the appearance of separateness, of disconnection, of temporary conditions, there's something that endures. Adonai, the four-letter name of God that's not pronounced but signifies absolute inclusivity, a being that has no boundaries of time or space. It indicates that which we call by the word Adonai, which is a replacement for what can't be pronounced. It refers to that which holds everything that exists. It is being itself. There's nowhere else to be. One of the reasons why we don't pronounce the name is that every name divides, separates what the name represents and everything else. Well, what happens if you have a name that actually doesn't divide anything? It absolutely unites everything. Well, at a certain point, to avoid that confusion, we stopped saying that name, but we were urged to appreciate what can't be spoken, but which always is. That there is a reality that's beyond containing in any words, because every possible word spoken is contained within that. There is no word big enough. There's no statement big enough to contain that which contains it all, that which is without limit, without boundary. That single presence, that one being, that life that we share. And we all have equal sharing of that life, equal sharing of that presence. And we're invited to remember, and we're invited to celebrate, and we're invited to express that presence. Shema Yisrael, listen. There is that which endures. There is that which is always. Adonai Eloheinu. Eloheinu is our God, but it's a plural word. It's the one manifesting as the many. Adonai Eloheinu is absolute oneness, absolute presence, absolute life, expresses through each and every one of us as the essence of our being, the life of our life, the reality that we are, not separate from us, but it's the who we are. It's how we know that spirituality is not a what. Spirituality is a who. Spiritual consciousness is awakening to the expanded presence, the essential life, the essential truth that each and every being carries. Shema Yisrael, listen. God is enduring being. Adonai Eloheinu, the eternal, awakens within each one of us as the life of our life, as our God. Adonai Echad, the unspeakable is one, a oneness like no other, an absolute, complete, inclusive, beyond time, beyond space, appearing, manifesting in time, in space as space, manifesting at this moment as you and as I, manifesting at this moment as the I within each and every one of us. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. It's a practice. It's a practice as a recitation. It's a practice as a chant. It's a practice as a remembering. Often there is the thought that practice, spiritual practice, is a way to awaken. And that is true. And there's the thought, though, that once we awaken, we no longer have to practice. Like practice is something we do to get there, or more appropriately, to get here. And then once we're here, we don't have to practice anymore. But that actually isn't how it works. When we awaken spiritually, we're practicing all the time. Practice is a way, not separate from the rest of our lives. It is a way to live as the present, as the moment. Now, every time the words disappear, and Cameron, we're grateful at the way he runs things, makes me larger, I ask to be made smaller again so that we can appreciate the words and simply invite us all to share them together. So just for a moment, repeat them with me. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hebrew is one of the holy languages. Like Sanskrit, somehow it expresses a depth that reminds us, that celebrates us. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That one being awakens within each and every one of us. It's the who that we are. It's the who that we are before conditions. It's the who that we are, not dependent, not controlled, not a victim of the conditions in our life and the conditions in our world. It's the who that we are which provides the ground for true evolution, for true creation, for true celebration, for the transcendence of the conditions that inhibit our connection, for the conditions which try to prove to us that we are separate, that we are warring, that we are dangerous to each other. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen. Listen and remember. We are one. Each and every one of us is one. Steve will be singing it, and we invite each of you to fill your homes with the sound of one.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Thank you, Stephen. I don't know if you were able to hear it, but I could hear people singing in their homes.
Excellent.
And it's true, they didn't sound quite as good as you sound, but some are doing pretty good.
I have a lot of effects and things I'm tricking everybody with.
Right. I heard the heavy reverb and the bass, that is just blasting as you, playing, right?
Yeah.
I deeply appreciate that. I'd like to invite us all, and I'm going to ask that Steve stays on the screen because we're going to conclude the meditation with music. But I'd like to invite each of us to allow a space now to close our outer eyes in the service of opening our inner eye of identity, our inner eye in which, through which, as which we are able more clearly to see, to perceive, to know the deeper, truer, more inclusive, more connected nature of our being. So I invite you, if you're comfortable, to let your eyes close and to simply allow yourself to be aware It's the most natural thing in the world. To take a few deep breaths and to be aware how that feels. How it feels in the body. Just recognizing that the deep breath nourishes every cell and every level of the body. Just revitalizing the flow of blood. And being aware of how it is in the body at this moment. It's your body. You have a body. But you are more than your body. You're the one aware of your body. You're even the one aware of the awareness of your body. Becoming aware of the mind and all of its activities, this conversation that so much of the time is happening so fast we're not even aware of it. But the parade of thoughts, the pull of the past, the yearning and sometimes the anxiety of the future, the imagination, just noticing what the mind does when we are not particularly directing it. We're not focusing, just aware of what it does. And aware that that is our mind. We have a mind. It's a magnificent mechanism. But the I that has a mind is more than the mind. So much of the time, it's as if the mind has us. But now it's clear that we have a mind. And to be aware as well of any feelings that arise. Often there's feelings attached to every thought in the mind, or feelings attached to sensations in the body, feelings attached to the mind's holding on to the past or grasping at the future. And just aware of feelings and noticing I have feelings. Yet I am more than my feelings. I am the one who has these feelings. Often I collapse into how I experience my body, or how my mind grabs me, or how sharp my feelings are in a moment. But in this moment of quiet, I remember. I just remember that I am more. I am more than my body. I am more than my mind. I am more than my feelings. Just noticing how compelling our problems are, how compelling our anxieties, how compelling our fears, how compelling our concerns, how compelling the uncertainty. But now just noticing that and appreciating that. And noticing that the space from which we are perceiving, the space from which we are knowing, the space in which we are holding our mind, our body, our feelings, that space is not controlled by what's in the mind or what's in the body or what's in our feelings. That space has a depth of freedom. That space has an expansiveness. Noticing that in the world of sensations, there are boundaries always. No matter how far out we're able to look, there's boundaries in the inner world. In the inner world, boundaries disappear. The veils of separateness are lifted. And we allow ourselves to remember a level of freedom, a level of connection, a level of peace. A level of joy. A peace and a joy that's not controlled by circumstances, but somehow is always present. Awakening. Awakening with a deepening sense of calmness, of safety, of knowing. The Psalm verse says, "Be still and know." When we still ourselves, we discover that we already know that I am is God. Behind each of our eyes, behind each of our separate identities, there is but one identity, one I am. And within our consciousness, that entire I am is present. I am always here. And in that space of I, that transcendent, unconditional peace and joy provide the blessing, the knowing required in the outer world. And so to practice the one we are allows us to transcend the control of the external world and instead imbue our actions, imbue our thoughts, imbue our breath with such a natural compassion, with such a natural awareness of connection, with such a natural love. Remembering love. Love is the way. Joy is the way. Peace is the way. Love is the way to God. Love is the way of God. Listen to the word of love within your heart. Listen to the word of love within your heart.
Love is the way to God. Love is the way of God. Listen to the word of love within. Listen to the word of love within your heart. Love is the way to God. Love is the way of God. Listen to the word of love within. Listen to the word of love within your heart. Love is the way to God. Love is the way of God. Listen to the word of love within. Listen to the word of love within your heart. Love is the way to God.
You know, it's true. Love is the way. Joy is the way. Peace is the way. Because all those are expressions of our connection. All those transcend the appearance of separation, the thoughts of separation, the fears of separation. Oh, as we approach the end of this June spiritual Saturday, what do we do now dealing with an uncertain future? There's a reminder on the screen encouraging support for the programs that we offer. It's really a privilege to be able to share with you. It's a privilege for me to be able to be doing these programs with Steve Mason and supported by Cameron Sullivan, who is our audio-visual master and allows us to do this. So we welcome those of you who choose to support the program so that we can continue to do this. I'm also asking Cameron to put up an email address for me. Rabbi Ted 2020 is the address that I've been using. Many of you know that I've been teaching now with a rather exceptional woman spiritual teacher named Tova Zev. You know, the question is, how do we stay awake? And each of us in our own ways tries to support each other, you know, and it's part of what my life has been about. It's part of what Tova's life is about. Our program is called Awakening in Place, and I just wanted to mention it because It's an intimate setting that allows us to discover the support within ourselves, our own individual ways to live into the oneness that we are. So if anybody wants information about that or is interested, use the email rabbited2020@gmail.com, and it's something that we would be privileged to share. Where's Steve? Will you put Steve back on? There he is.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
Good. This is good. So good.
This is really, it's like, yes, we live at a time where there are so many fires and there's so much smoke around, and we think we clear it, and then there it is again, and it's almost as if it's always ready to be fanned into another flame. And that's what it's like walking around in an ego. And it's not something to fight, it's something to know. It's something to appreciate. Ultimately, it's something to bless and find our own ways, as each of us are striving to do, to remember more deeply, to practice more consciously, and to live more meaningfully and with greater purpose. So I'd just like to thank each and every one of you who has joined us this morning, or those of you who are watching this after the fact. I appreciate the awareness that this could not happen without you. And I know that I feel that very directly when we are together in a sanctuary space. Often I'm aware that this could not have happened without each and every one of you present. And on some level, I know that that is absolutely true in this moment as well. The reality of our connection, the reality of our oneness so far surpasses the capacity of our individual minds to know. So we celebrate that with so much gratitude, that we might each be a blessing for each other, for ourselves, and for our world. That we may recognize that we are always together, intentionally engaging in a journey from strength to strength, from love to love, and from life to life. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shalom. Yai dai da dai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai da dai dai da dai. Yai 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 dai da dai da dai dai da dai 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 dai. Yai dai dai dai. Yai dai da dai dai dai. Yai dai da dai dai dai. Yai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai da dai dai da dai. Yai dai da dai dai da dai.
Well, I couldn't say it any better than Jenny said it. Thank you. A wonderful message, a wonderful music, a wonderful spiritual Saturday. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And thank you, everybody.
Cameron.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.